This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans, and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/adventures in Angular. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Adventures in Angular. This week on our panel we have me. I don't know where everybody else is. We usually record at this time, but I guess people are busy. I'm just going to quickly shout out JS Remote Conf. That's coming up in May. So if you're interested in an online conference, you can attend it live for free. You can get the videos. If you buy a ticket, we're going to have a bunch of extras and freebies. So definitely check that out. We also have a special guest today, and that's Stephen Fluin.
Hello.
Now,
how's it going?
You're the new DevRel person. You know, we've had, I'm blanking on her name right now.
Jules. Yes.
Jules. We've had her on a bunch of times. Talked to a few other people on the core team, but you're the guy now, huh?
That's me.
Nice. So lots of stuff going on in Angular. But before we get there, do you want to just give an introduction? Anything you want to share beyond the developer relations?
Sure. No. So I lead developer relations on the Angular team. Really I have two missions on the Angular team. So first is to help developers and organizations be successful with Angular. And second, it's to understand what it's like to be an Angular developer out in the real world so that we can make the right sort of platform decisions as we continue to evolve things from our side. And I really think that having those two goals as a starting point really informs everything we do, from conferences we speak at to kind of how we spend our time with GDEs, with companies, working on the platform, validating technologies, exploring new ideas. Kind of everything we do is informed by that.
Awesome. So I'm curious, as we dive into this, I think people tend to get updates on what's going on with Angular from Angular Connect, NGConf, whatever other conferences people are paying attention to. I think the last one that I heard news from was NG Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so what is new? What's coming down the pipe with Angular, or maybe what's been recently released?
Sure, yeah, because that's actually a really great way to start the question, because how you define new is actually different to everyone. So we find that a lot of people keep up to date with everything we do, every commit that we make into the repository. Someone's kind of posting it on Reddit or making a big deal about it. But a lot of people aren't really focused on Angular at all. They're using it as a tool, and then they kind of want Angular to get out of their way. And then they just check in every 6 months, every 2 years to figure out what's going on. So depending on how closely you're paying attention, a lot of stuff is new. So kind of if I look back maybe in the last 6 months, we've had a bunch of big announcements. We talked about how we released Angular version 5, which is another in this kind of series of not huge updates, just kind of making the platform better, evolving it, making it easier to use, smaller, and faster. We had a big success in terms of finally getting material out of beta. So for a long time, it was very high quality, but we didn't want to lock down the API yet, so we kept it in beta for quite some time.
Yeah, forever.
It was in beta for a long time. And actually, it was really interesting talking to people, because they're like, "Oh, I can't use material because it's in beta," and I'm like, "Yeah, you can. It's actually a really good component library."
Yeah, you'll just get more good stuff as time goes on.
Yeah, more good stuff. We did have to make one big change for developers, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. But it was a prefix change that we had to do. But what we did with that change, and this is something we're trying to do kind of for everything we do, is build tools that automate those changes for you. Right. So when we are forced to do some sort of breaking change or create some sort of developer pain, is there a way that we can ship a tool that does it based on our understanding of it? We also shipped the CDK, or the component dev kit, from the material team. to kind of abstract all of the things that the material team was doing to solve problems for developers in a way that you can use if you don't want the material design aesthetic, which I think we're really excited about, because there's a lot of hard problems in terms of building component libraries. Like overlays is a really good example where you have this fundamental concern where on the developer side, I want the code of the overlay to be as tightly coupled to the component that's creating it, managing it as possible. But from a DOM perspective, you can't have that, because if anything at a parent level has position absolute or a fixed width or height, then your overlay is going to get cut off. It's not going to render properly. And so having a standardized way of kind of managing the dialogue, the overlay, plus being able to make sure that that's rendered properly in DOM is a problem that we don't want other people to have to go and solve over and over and over.
Yeah, that's interesting. I talked to Brad. Sorry, I've been out of it today. I talked to Brad and about this, and I thought it was really interesting because essentially what you can do with the component development kit is you can, let's say, instead of using a material, you're using something like Bootstrap. You can say, make all my tables this way, and then you just have a table component that behaves by default the right way, and things like that. So you can just have what you need, and you can pull it all in.
Yeah, I mean, like basically every company I'm talking to, they, for branding and for kind of internal reasons, have to build their own component library. And we totally understand that, and we know that material can't be used by everyone. And so we're like, hey, how can we take all of the knowledge that we have about the platform? How do we take the knowledge that we have about building good, accessible components and help people skip steps, right? Use our code to not have to reinvent the wheel every time.
And has this actually been, you started some trials of this yet? What's the response been like so far?
The response has been huge. So from the conferences that I've been to in the last few months, apparently every component author is getting asked, hey, are you using material? Are you using the CDK? Because this is something that now is kind of becoming a badge of, hey, I want my component authors to be using the CDK, because then I know that they're going to be accessible. They're going to be high quality. They're going to kind of work in more browsers and more use cases.
When you say the CDK, when you say component authors, do you mean like third-party component authors, or are you talking about like the internal developer component authors?
Both. So both the if you're working for a company and you're asking the kind of shared services team at your company for these sorts of things, but I've also heard it from a couple of the component authors that we work with, where even if you ship a public component library, there's lots of these out there like Kendo, Clarity, NG Bootstrap, all these. They're being asked the question of, are you CDK based, which I think was actually very surprising to me.
So do you know which of the component authors or component libraries, the prominent third-party libraries, are moving to this or are already, they're not already doing this, like the CDK is too new, right?
Correct, yeah.
But do you know who has plans right now?
I do not know who has plans, but I would guess most of the ones that we talk to, but I don't have any names or anything like that.
I mean, there's a lot of great components out there. Kendo is, obviously a great example of that.
Yeah, Infragistics. I mean, there's literally hundreds of these, right?
My favorite has always been Prime Faces. It was always my favorite. It was just the easiest one to use right off the bat, but it was actually the hardest one once their component didn't quite do everything that I needed, or I needed to dig into their own customization. Well, I wouldn't say hardest, but it lost some of its glamour at that point. But I've really liked their library, so I hope that they are planning to adopt CDK as well.
Yeah, and I mean, like, obviously, you don't have to use the CDK, but we want to make the CDK good enough that people want to, right?
Right.
In general.
Right.
What are the advantages of using the CDK then over just building your own components from scratch?
Sure. So there's kind of two types of things in the CDK. So there's behaviors. So this is like an overlay or a dialogue or bidirectional rendering support. And then there's a couple kind of blank components. So we have a data table or we have a stepper. So the advantages for other teams is really just get all of those kind of principles of well-designed components that you can just add to your component library out of the box. So, I mean, I really think about it as delivering higher quality experiences to your users and saving time from a dev point of view.
That makes sense.
Do you have? Are there any external clients that have made significant use of the CDK already?
I think it's too new, I would say, to have that sort of feedback.
Okay. So you guys you're still kind of in the state with the CDK of we have it where well, you tell me the state. Like, is it where you're like, okay, we want third parties to start using this heavily, or are you not quite to that?
No, we're absolutely there. I mean, the day we took material out of beta, we also took the CDK out of beta.
Gotcha.
So that was the point at which we've already validated all these principles within material, and now it's I think people are starting to add the CDK to their project. I mean, so what's challenging, I think, there and why there aren't more examples today is that these things are really, really helpful when you're building a new component library. They're less helpful if you've already tried solving all these problems, right? You already have a giant code base where you've figured out how to do overlays. You have an opinion on that. You've figured out how to do bidirectional input. You figured out how to do accessibility. If you've already written all that code, you could move to the CDK so that we're going to kind of maintain that and keep that up to date and add new features. But the incentives just aren't there in the same way that they would be for a new component library.
Gotcha. Right. Totally makes sense. So cool.
So I think we were talking about some of the things that have kind of happened over the last 6 months. Some of the other big ones are our CLI. So we launched Schematics, which is a way of kind of running arbitrary code to do tree transforms. And so what that actually means is that we do this under the hood with ng-new to create a new project. We do this with ng-generate to scaffold out components and things like that. And now people are using these schematics in order to do their own things. So the Narwhal folks with their NX, they're using schematics under the hood. We're talking a lot to the native script folks who are going to be using NX to allow you to generate things with native script. We're looking and talking to the NGRX team so that you can kind of automatically create actions or reducers or whatever you want. So that's actually a really exciting kind of new edge where we can welcome a lot more people into the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And then schematics gets way more powerful in the future when we start adding kind of different types of schematics. And so the first one that actually landed in the CLI release just a few weeks ago is called ng update. Have you guys heard about ng update?
I believe I have.
So I'm really excited about ng update because I want one command where every developer goes to make sure that their project is up to date with kind of the Angular ecosystem of dependencies. And so the version that we have today is going to update your package.json, make sure you're using the right version of RxJS, TypeScript, those sorts of things that I'll say NPM maybe doesn't express that well with the pure dependencies. But the idea behind ng update is that we can also run any ng update schematics that are available from those packages. So when I run ng update, RxJS could have a schematic in their package that will automatically rewrite my code to take advantage of some best practice or to take advantage of some breaking change that they've needed to make. And so this is a world where imagine if every kind of component library, every dependency you had was writing these schematics and wired into that one command where, as an Angular developer, I run ng update, and then all of my third-party bits are updating themselves and updating my code.
Yeah, that sounds pretty convenient.
Yeah, definitely.
Kind of to change gears a little bit, one thing that I talked to Brad about at NG Atlanta was the build tools convergence. And we had Alex on last week to talk about it. But I'm curious if you want to just give kind of a high-level overview of that and what that means for people who are working on, using the CLI to build their stuff.
Sure. So I'll start with, I don't think it means a lot for them other than experiences that are going to get better over time. This isn't going to be some kind of dramatic world-changing thing that you have to go relearn an entirely new workflow for. But the genesis behind the kind of ABC initiative all comes from the fact that the build tooling we use within Google does not look like the build tooling that the open source kind of world uses. So in the real world, we use Webpack. Internal to Google, we don't use Webpack at all. Out in the real world, we use all these different kind of compilers. We rely a lot on these standardized tools that are good at making us productive as developers today, but they start to break down at scale, right? If you have 10 million files of JavaScript, or let's say 100 modules in your Angular application, things start to get slower. And part of that comes from the kind of mentality and the approach to some of these build systems. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when you run a Webpack build today, and we're talking to them and trying to see if there's ways that we can address this, but Webpack has to know about the entire dependency graph of your application. So you need to know everything at one point in time and kind of have all those in the same place. Whereas if we look at a build tool like the one we use within Google called Bazel, that's been open sourced, you can actually look at individual modules as individual compilation units. And then when you're building the app, you don't actually need to rebuild all of the individual compilation units. You can just kind of pull the output of those compiles in, meaning that you can do things in parallel, meaning that you can do things at a much more dramatic scale, because you really want the compile time to be based on the size of the change, not the size of the code base. And I think Alex does a really good job of explaining this and talking about this.
Yeah, it was really interesting just to look at that and realize, hey, if I didn't change much, it'll just compile that bit. And
So I mean, how I see this kind of manifesting. So the first project that's nearest to completion right now is actually being able to use this to build libraries. So because you don't have this big compilation unit, where we're really taking advantage of a lot of the Webpack capabilities today that don't necessarily exist in the kind of Bazel world yet. And so for libraries, it's a much more isolated problem. And so that's an easier place to say, hey, maybe Bazel can help. But beyond that, I think for most developers, what will end up happening is if at some point it makes sense to either add Bazel to the build process or integrate it in some way, we can kind of do that behind the scenes, and developers shouldn't have to change their life cycle. They shouldn't have to kind of redo everything that they've done.
Right. Yeah, the whole thing sounds really fun just to dive into. For me, the build tools. Yeah, build tools are kind of interesting.
Build tools are fun.
Yeah.
If
everybody else is like, ugh.
If you like build tools, you will love Bazel. If you don't like build tools, you continue to use the CLI and continue to love the CLI.
Well, I'm waiting for your book, Fun with Build Tools.
There we go. I'm actually working on, so this week as we record this, I'm working on my Get a Job course. So if you're out there looking for a job, go to getacoderjob.com and you can get the course. But after that, I'm working on an automation course. So here's how you automate all of the stuff. And that's mostly build tools. I mean, a lot of it's, linters and things like that as well. Just automating all those processes so you get as much information as possible from your app as it's built and analyzed and then automatically deployed. So you just make all this stuff such that you don't have to think too deeply about it. And so,
I mean, that's actually an area that I think we as the Angular team care a lot about, is not just the writing of code and testing of code, but also how can we go further in terms of helping you, for example, configure your server or configure your CI?
Yeah. So
we're looking at how can we integrate those things into our build system or make it easier or be opinionated about those things without taking away freedom. Because if there's actually a huge percent of sites now that aren't doing some kind of very common web development best practices that would make your Angular apps better. So one example of that is there's still a lot of sites that aren't doing HTTPS. But even simpler things like content compression, where turning on content compression from your web front end saves you so much time as a user coming to a website, right? Because if I have to download 150 uncompressed kilobytes, that's so much more than downloading 60 or 70 kilobytes of compressed content.
Yeah. The other thing that I see is just that the ways that things break, it frustrates people, and it's usually around a deployment. The things that we catch with things like CI and static analysis and linters and, that just make it more pleasant to code in our projects, or make it so that a bug is caught or things like that. All that stuff is stuff that pays off, but it's not always the stuff that we want to spend our time doing. A lot of times we want to be able to just write the code, right? Just build the new feature, make it all work. And so if you can make a lot of that stuff transparent or free, or at least, somebody can sit down and say, okay, you know what? I'm gonna muscle through my gag reflex for this for an hour, and then I'm gonna get the payoff.
Although I
think
like our opinion is always, how can we get rid of that muscle downtime and make
I agree.
Because we've got, I talked about ng update, but we've got another command we're working on called ng add, where again, using schematics under the hood, the idea is that you can take an existing Angular project and add something to it. So you could, for example, theoretically, we're not working on this piece yet, but ng add circle CI, and then it would render out a circle CI config that when I push it up to GitHub just kind of works.
Yep.
That sort of thing would be.
Yes, I want that, please.
I second it.
Help us build it.
Yeah, but it's that kind of thing. And at least if people understand what the options are, then they can work on, then we can work on, okay. Here's your essentially deploying your post build stuff.
Yep.
And so then if there's a wizard or something that people can run, that'd be great. So we've talked about build tools. We've talked about, all of the other things that, anyway, my brain totally blanked. Go ahead,
one
Joe.
of the things I was hoping to hear about was the new 1.7 CLI. Maybe that isn't your particular, but I know 1.7 of the CLI just came out. Maybe this is a little bit too particular for the topic of the show, but I was kind of interested in that and what's in there, if you happen to know.
Sure. I mean, the biggest change from my perspective is actually the introduction of this ng update command.
Okay. Yeah, because I actually went through the change notes and I was like, I'm not sure that I'm seeing, and maybe it's just because I didn't understand every, they were very, very, very short comments, but I wasn't even seeing the justification for another minor, version in there. Like, so that was,
it was a very, very small release, but it's kind of in preparation for the next major release of CLI. The idea is we wanted to get out this ng update command now, so that when people want to move to the next major, this can help kind of bridge that gap.
Right. Cool. Another interesting feature that I have heard talked about a lot, and I don't know, I don't think maybe Schematics is this, or maybe some of the other stuff that we talked about is this, but with some other front-end frameworks, they have a process when, hey, a new version of the framework comes out, they have the tools that actually look at the source code trees,
the
code
AST parsers. Sure.
Yeah, AST parsers to help you do those updates and stuff. You haven't specifically mentioned that yet in this issue or this episode, right? So is that something that's on the radar? Is that seen as a high priority? Certainly all of my updates, when I've updated, even from like 2 to the latest version of 5, I've never seen problems, but I'm also not running a million lines of code either.
No, that's what ng update does. And I think I did maybe talk about it before you joined.
We did talk about ng update. I was curious, maybe we didn't talk about it under the hood then. Is it actually using code mods or is it using pattern recognition?
So Schematics is doing AST parsing. So we actually do this for like ng generate. So if you generate a new component, you can either specify which module you want to add it to manually as a flag. But if you don't, we're going to actually look and do a search of the application starting in the current directory for the nearest module, and then add that as an import to the nearest module, a declaration from the nearest module. So this is an example of where we're not doing regular expressions here. This is all AST parsing, and we've given you a couple methods to help with that in Schematics.
All right, cool. I apologize. I sound like I'm not drawing the dots together, and I kind of wasn't.
Well, what I find is a lot of times, if you're not drawing the dots together, somebody who's listening isn't either. So
right. So, and that is actually something that I think this is the kind of thing that matters a lot to people when they hear about stuff, and it matters to the companies that are doing a million lines of code. The amount of manual update it takes to make a version change, even a major version change, has always been tiny. So I've really appreciated that about Angular.
Absolutely, and
it matters more.
So I'll repeat some of the things I said a little bit before, and then you can decide which version you want to keep in editing it. So what's really magical about ng update is not only is it going to update your package.json with a knowledge of the dependencies of Angular that you're supposed to be having. So whether that's Zone.js, RxJS, TypeScript, those sorts of things that currently you manage with a package JSON and peer dependencies, which doesn't work that well. But we can also, from each Angular package, run a schematic. So, for example, if for example, HTTP client needs to update its API, HTTP client can actually include a schematic for its update so that it knows how to update your code based on its own changes. And we've gone even further than that. Then this doesn't just apply to your kind of packages coming from the Angular team. This applies to third-party packages as well. So with the RxJS version 6, our hope is that we will have a schematic in there that when you run ng update, it will actually do things to make you follow best practices. And the best example of that is moving to these pipeable or lettable operators, where we've wanted to get rid of the side effects of import RxJS/add/operator/switch map, where that's actually modifying a prototype and it has side effects that are very hard to manage and control. The better way to do it now is to import switch map from RxJS/operators. And that's a relatively mechanical change. So we've actually written the schematics that, or the TS-lint fixes basically under the hood that will do this for you as part of that ng update. And so this is kind of the magic that of a world that I see in the future, where maybe a year from now, when your component library updates, you just run ng update, you get the latest version, and it's going to update your code to automatically account for any changes to behaviors that it's needed to do whenever possible, right? So there's a huge amount that we can automate, and when you can't, we can still do things like add to-dos or add comments and notes and warnings and things like that.
Cool.
Are you ready to master Angular? Oasis Digital offers Angular Bootcamp, a 3-day intense workshop class for individuals or teams. They cover Angular 4 and 2 and focus on the skills and knowledge you need for complex, data-rich applications. They also still offer AngularJS for teams supporting older projects. Bring them to your site or send developers to them in St. Louis, San Francisco, New York, DC, and other cities, and online at angularbootcamp.com.
So one other thing that I keep talking to people about and hearing about is all the angst and panic over the sunsetting of AngularJS.
Hey, before we move on to that, can I ask one more follow-up question?
Go ahead.
I think there's an interesting example or question about these ng update. And that is when it comes to things that aren't core to Angular. So as an example, RxJS recently made a fairly reasonable, significant change where they created these lettable operators, right? That's a significantly different style of programming within what RxJS does, right? How those operators work. So is ng update going to handle, or does it already handle those sorts of situations as well? And then at what point do you draw a line on third party? I mean, RxJS is technically third party, right? So at what point do you draw a line about third party code?
So yes, this is totally intended to handle those sorts of changes. I mean, that's a use case that we're explicitly looking at as, hey, how can we help people adopt the best practices there? So that it's safer to remove at some point in the future the old worst way of doing it. But where, in terms of where we draw the line for third parties, I would almost say that we don't. So we let other people draw those lines because we have this package JSON. We can look in the node modules file. We can look for references to, hey, here's a schematic for updating this package. You could theoretically use ng update to update any package. So let's say I'm depending on Moment. They could theoretically, and this is kind of where we hope to go. Obviously, ng update doesn't have this fully kind of baked out yet. But if Moment wants to, in their package JSON, refer to here's how to update me using schematics, they could do that.
Cool. Did you state who actually owns ng update? Is that owned by the Angular team?
So we own the kind of the CLI infrastructure dev kit side of that. But under the hood, it's all schematics owned by the individual packages.
Okay. Yeah. So when it comes to update, like Moment, for example, they can do their own stuff. But like building ng update itself in the schematics, that's actually just part of the whole schematics.
That's just part of the CLI team. Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I think React has something like that. Well, they at least push not just updates to React, the package or the library itself, but they also push upgrade packages that will upgrade your React code. Now, I don't know if it does it across the entire infrastructure like you're talking about, but I know that at least for that one package, if there are changes to the React library, it'll update those as well. So you can run it
Interesting.
against your
I've
code.
not heard about that.
Yeah, we just started a React podcast and they were talking about how nice that was, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So yeah, anyway. So I did ask about AngularJS or Angular 1 for the people who aren't as familiar with the terminology. But yeah, AngularJS, it's just going to get security updates after July is what I'm hearing.
That is the plan. So security and bug fix updates. So we've actually done a ton of talking to developers and a ton of studies in terms of what people are using. What we're seeing is that most AngularJS applications aren't updating to the latest versions anyway. And so what this means for the kind of the majority of developers is that all of the AngularJS apps that you write or are kind of starting to write today, they're going to keep working, and kind of we're guaranteeing that they're going to work if and be defended from any sort of security problems or any kind of major browser changes. So like we don't anticipate any of these things, but we wanted to give people a level of safety and security and saying, hey, we're going to give this window where any sort of those kind of major security or critical bug fixes, we're going to take care of them.
That makes sense. And
so
go ahead.
Sorry. No, you go.
Well, my thinking is just it's nice to know, hey, if I'm still on the Angular 1 infrastructure that I get support. But at the same time, if I'm on the newer versions, Angular 5, Angular 4, whatever, that you're getting to the point where you want to focus much more, I guess, on the newer stuff, where a lot more people are innovating and need more help, I think.
I want to provide a counterpoint to that. I never felt like it was that big of a deal, to be honest. Angular 1 has been so solid for so long. What support do you need? Like, nobody's calling up Google and saying, hey, I can't get this thing to work. Will you help me out, Stephen? Right?
I mean, it's funny. The questions that we do hear are things like, change detection is too slow, or I want to use TypeScript with it, or hey, how do I encapsulate these things better? And it's like every question that we get like that, or almost every question we get like that, the answer isn't, here's how to do that in AngularJS. The answer is, hey, we made this completely better in Angular.
Right. Yeah. And so I get the idea of, hey, it's nice to know that if some critical security bug or flaw either came out or a new browser released with it, and AngularJS needed an update to counteract that either discovered flaw or newly introduced flaw, whatever it was, that it's nice to know that the Angular team, somebody behind Google, right, the AngularJS team, is going to be on top of fixing that. Although, with the state that the AngularJS is in, if something like that happened, if a critical bug came out and it was just a community-driven product, it would still have an update or a fix, toot sweet. The community is big enough that it's not going to let something like that go on for long. So I never, as much as I'm happy to see it was a 3-year, right? 3-year LTS for AngularJS.
Yep.
I don't see that even the new features that have been put in 1.6 and 1.7 were super critical. There's some important security stuff, but nothing since the components in 1.5 for me, that was where AngularJS hit its sweet spot. From a developer experience, and everything since then has made little to no difference to me as an AngularJS developer. So I'm not really a big...
Completely agree. I mean, that's why when we talk about it, or some of the words we used were, AngularJS is stable. We're going to stop breaking you. And I mean, the reaction that I've heard from developers is kind of, that's nice.
Right.
It's almost a non-reaction.
Right. So I want to ask you a question related to AngularJS, which is, I assume you have heard of Copilot.
Yes. Angular Copilot from the Angular Docs folks?
I'm not sure who it's from. If that's who it's from, then yes. This is the AngularJS upgrade, automatic sort of an upgrade type.
No, yeah. We've spoken a bunch with that team.
Cool. So is there anything interesting to say about that?
I would encourage people that are still having an AngularJS project to check it out. It is a paid tool from kind of an independent team where their intent is really to help people migrate. So what ended up happening there, a little bit about their story, is that they got really good at analyzing semantically AngularJS applications. And so they could actually understand what the AngularJS application was trying to do. And then they did the same thing for Angular, and they're like, wait a minute, a lot of these concepts are the same, and we can draw a mapping between them, and we can help developers take on this challenge. So we talked a ton to that team about the ideas that they're doing and kind of how it works. Have not heard a ton of community feedback. So if people like it, if they don't like it, we would love to hear that so that we could either spend more time or less time talking about it.
That was mostly what I wanted to hear, was just your opinion, input, and kind of an official view on Copilot. I
love the idea. If someone could build a button that I press to update all of my AngularJS apps, they would probably make a lot of money.
I would like to ask you a little bit of a follow-up question. I don't know if you've seen much of the result of it, but do you feel like it is like step 1 of 15 in an update, or is it step 1 of 4 in an update? Like, how does it, or really even more important is, does it cause your Angular code to be so weird and crunky that, yes, it is technically now Angular, but you would quickly want to go and make a bunch of changes to it?
I mean, I think most code that was written for AngularJS, just based on my experience, having worked a lot with that, you probably want to rewrite it anyway, just because, I don't know, every 6 months, we look back at our own code and say, what was that person thinking?
Right. And fashion changes too.
But I mean, in terms of whether it's step 1 or 1 through 5, how I like to think about this, and obviously we don't have a huge amount of community validation of this, so I'd love to hear what people think. But I like to think of it more as the framework, a guided framework in which it's going to walk you through the 10 steps or the 20 steps that you're going to go and take. And so instead of saying, here, I did the first step, now you do everything else, it should say, hey, I did step 1, here's step, now go do X, Y, and Z to each of your components. And then here's step 2, now we need to migrate the services. I moved all the files, I renamed them, I put wrappers around them, now go fix the scope references. Like that sort of thing. And I think that's almost ultimately more useful to people than just Frankensteining their code into a new structure, but walking them through how can I do an incremental migration from AngularJS to Angular.
Cool. All right. What's next? Have we covered all the topics?
Never.
Are we up to date now with where Angular is at the last 6 months of Angular?
I had 2 more things.
I do have one other question. One question that I probably should save for last. So I definitely have one more question to ask.
Okay, and I know I'm going probably too slow for this. We're talking too much about the past, but
no, not at all.
Well, we asked for it, so.
So 2 other things that have been happening recently in the kind of Angular ecosystem is we just moved all of our content, all of our docs examples over to a site called StackBlitz. And I'm personally a really big fan of StackBlitz because basically they've abstracted away all of the Node, NPM, set up your dev tools challenges that a lot of developers have, where on StackBlitz, I can in a single click be up and running with an Angular application, or in a single URL, I can load a Angular CLI project from GitHub and be seeing it locally on my machine running with all the dependencies installed, everything working, and then I can make changes, I can tweak it, I can see how it goes. I mean, StackBlitz is very mind-blowing the first time you see it. And then I think one of the things in their roadmap is actually to be able to commit back to GitHub. And I love the idea of this because I think it's a huge equalizer of how we could bring kind of more developers into being effective in maybe not writing Angular code, but interacting with Angular code if they don't have to do any of the setup or tooling side of it.
Yeah, we did an episode with the guys behind StackBlitz, both on this show and JavaScript Jabber. So
awesome.
If you want more deep details on how it all works, go check that out. But I think it's interesting that, yeah, we keep finding better ways to remove barriers for people to come in and actually see how this all hangs together.
I mean, I've joked about an ng.exe. So imagine a single binary where we bundled Node, NPM, and our CLI so that without having to install any of those things, you could just run ng.exe, it would either create a new project or update a project, those sorts of things.
But I'm really excited about its possibilities for learning Angular.
Definitely.
It's obvious, like it was put into the docs, right? So super natural choice there. But just think of all the possibilities there will be for people who want to learn Angular to remove all the extra fluff that is the problem. What was so great about AngularJS is it was one script tag, and all of a sudden there's magic.
Yes.
Crazy amounts of magic. And
StackBlitz kind of brings a lot of that back, which is what I think we're excited about. And, there's features that, a lot of people are trying to build really cool tooling. One of the coolest tools I've talked to someone about, I forget the name, but they do something a little bit similar to StackBlitz, but they have instructor tools so that when you run a room full of people through a workshop or something like that, you can actually monitor their progress.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm just amazed at what our ecosystem is doing to help developers get onboarded.
Yep. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of the tool that I heard of that's kind of like that, but I won't recall it before the show's over. But yeah,
no worries.
It's just fascinating stuff. And I think if we could solve video chat, then life would be better for everybody.
Absolutely.
So was that just one thing, or was that your two things?
No, the other thing was, so we've been spending a lot of time talking to the native script folks because a lot of companies are asking, hey, how can I put Angular applications onto mobile devices? And there's a bunch of great options for that. So obviously PWAs are a very exciting technology in terms of the way that they can build more engaging experiences. So with offline via the web, with push notifications, with faster performance, those sorts of things. But often we'll see companies that want an installed App Store experience. So there's things like Cordova, which is used by platforms like Ionic. But there's also things like NativeScript, where the NativeScript folks have written basically their own version of HTML or this NativeScript, where you can have the exact same Angular code, but then instead of writing HTML, you write NativeScript. And then instead of rendering to HTML and to the browser, we render to native UI widgets. And so that's actually been an exciting technology that's been around for a couple of years now, I think, at this point. And we're working with them to say, hey, how can we make NativeScript more integrated with Angular so that it's easier to, for example, add NativeScript to an existing project, or how can we integrate it into our tooling so that you can build these things more easily, whether you're rendering out to a browser or rendering out to a installed mobile package.
That's really interesting. And, I've looked at NativeScript, I've looked at React Native, I've looked at Ionic. And yeah, depending on where you want to go with what you're doing, it's really compelling to be able to see, oh, look, we have a different, basically compile target, and it's mobile instead of web.
It fits very well with how Angular is architected.
Yeah, exactly. And so your template, instead of being HTML, is, whatever their XML-like markup is. And there's just a ton of power to that. And in some ways, then you're able to provide people with the experience they expect, because all of those widgets, buttons, lists, etc., they're all native stuff. They all work just like you would expect on your Android or iOS device, where something like Ionic, it's all web rendered. And so, sometimes it's just not exactly the same. And then just delegating all that work across the JavaScript bridge. So it's JavaScript core or V8, and then just having it handled by your Angular component. That's really, really convenient.
Absolutely. And there are pros and cons to both in terms of performance, in terms of code sharing,
right.
And whatnot, but I'm really glad we have a rich ecosystem with a couple of really good choices for developers.
Yep. So what do you have to do in order to support them? It seems like for the most part, there's not a ton that you'd have to do. So do you just allow them to plug in a different templating engine and that's it? Or is there more to it, to what you've done?
So we're working with them in a couple ways. So we're working with them to kind of advocate for Angular developers. So how do we get more code sharing with HTML, things like that? Also looking at the tooling story. So historically, you would have to use their CLI in order to run and build NativeScript projects. and we'd like it to be able to kind of all run through the Angular CLI. And so,
that would be awesome.
Schematics is a big piece of that. And then, there's even kind of crazier ideas where if we're able to bring this ng-add vision to fruition, where you can add things to your project. Imagine an ng-add command or ng-add native script command that then goes and takes your existing Angular application and gives you a .ns template for each of your components and sets up the build system for you.
That would be slick.
That would be really slick.
I won't lie. I love the idea.
Awesome. Yeah. No, as soon as we or they have something for people to try out, I'm really excited to get that sort of thing into people's hands.
Very nice.
I won't make any promises about that, but it is something that we're working towards.
Well, I heard it was going to be really awesome. That's what you said, right?
That's what I said. Money back guarantee.
All right, Joe, what was the thing that you wanted to bring up?
Oh, now I got to remember what it was.
You sounded really excited. So
I was really excited about
sure
it.
You can't have forgotten it.
And now I've actually forgotten what it was. Dang it.
ng update, ng add, elements, webpack 4, Bazel, library support, Ivy.
Oh, are you going to announce anything new at ng-conf?
Who knows? I can't tell you now. If we're going to announce at ng-conf, that would be...
I wasn't asking what you're not, just if you're going to announce anything.
I think there are cool new things that are happening in Angular all the time, and we're excited to be at ng-conf to talk about them.
Are Mishko and Igor going to come dressed up as Parzival?
Oh, I hadn't even considered that idea. Isn't he just a generic avatar?
He starts out that way.
So I don't know what a generic JavaScript avatar would look like.
I don't know either.
I don't know.
Cool. Well, that was all my questions. So that was my last one.
Awesome. Well, if people want to follow what's going on with the Angular team, is there a good place to keep up on this? Let's say they're
absolutely.
Oh, I'm feeling enlightened. I kind of know what's going on. Yeah. How do they stay in touch?
So the best way to follow us would be probably blog.angular.io, which is where we try and put out kind of the news and what's happening and the perspectives coming from the team and from the community. But then obviously, if you're looking for just information about one of these topics, Angular.io, our documentation site, is a fantastic place to start. And then, in terms of kind of the broader community, this is something we care a lot about. And so there's something like over 800 different meetups across the world. So I definitely recommend you take a look at one of your meetups, take a look at participating in one of our repositories on GitHub, sending a PR, filing an issue, or joining a community like one of our Gitter communities.
Awesome.
Awesome.
All right. And if people want to follow you specifically, are you on Twitter and stuff?
I am on Twitter and stuff. You can follow me at Stephen Fluin, STEPHEN FLUIN.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks.
For you, the listeners of JavaScript Jabber, Loot Crate is offering an opportunity to save 10% on any new subscription at lootcrate.com. Just enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Loot Crate is one of my favorite things. Every month I get a box in the mail, costs less than $20, and it comes with all kinds of goodies. I have stuff from, just looking at my shelf, Batman, Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and much, much more. So if you're a geek, a gamer, anything like that, and you want cool stuff to put around your office, cool t-shirts, comic books, etc., then definitely check out Loot Crate. To save 10% on your new subscription, go to lootcrate.com/Ruby. Again, that's lootcrate.com/Ruby to save 10% on any new subscription. Enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings.
Joe, do you have some picks for us?
Oh, I'm first. Yeah. Sure, I do have picks. I've been doing a lot of... I've gotten back into Dungeons & Dragons recently, the last year or two.
Fun.
I did a lot when I was a kid and didn't do it any forever. And then I had kids that started getting old enough. And strangely enough, my wife, we tried playing Dungeons & Dragons and she had a good time. And so I've gotten more and more into Dungeons & Dragons lately. One of the things that I have discovered is this really great product put out called Pathfinder Plot Twists. So if you happen to play Dungeons & Dragons or just about any other fantasy, at least fantasy-based role-playing game, although it could probably work for even a non-fantasy-based role-playing game, they're a great product, and it allows you to have a way for your characters to the players in your game to have cards that they hold on to and can use in the game to kind of change how things work. And so it was this really fun idea, and it won't make a lot of sense to people who don't play Dungeons & Dragons, but it makes a lot of sense to people who do. If you do play, give it a try. Super awesome. So, and then I want to pick a classic that I have picked many, many, many times before, which is the TV show Arrested Development. Continues to be my favorite TV show many, 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 many years after it was put out. I still think it's the funniest thing that's ever been put on TV. And there we go. Those are my picks.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks. My first pick is a board game. It is called Hogwarts Battles. It's a Harry Potter game. Now, if you're not into Harry Potter, don't let that turn you off. It's a collaborative deck building game, and it is a ton of fun. My wife and I went on a trip this last weekend for her birthday, and we went with her dad and her sister and brother-in-law, and we just had a good time. We wandered through some houses because we went on. Basically, you get to walk through brand new homes and see what they've been building into them down in the St. George, Utah area, and then we'd come back and we'd play like 6 hours of this game. It was just a ton of fun. So yeah, excited about that. We really, really enjoyed it. And the other pick I have is my Get a Coder Job course. If you are out there thinking you want to look for a job or you want to prep for looking for a job, because it kind of just walks you through what kind of a job do I want? What do I like about my current job? What don't I like about my current job? So that you can make good decisions going forward about where you want to wind up. And then it teaches you how to research companies and stuff so that you can find the company that matches up with what you want. So anyway, so if you're thinking about looking for a job, I mean, this may just encourage you to go ask for a raise, or it may encourage you to actually go do the research and apply for companies that you really want to work at. Because the ultimate goal is to help you wind up in a job that you're really happy with. And that may be the one you have, but it is most of the content's for people who aren't in the job that they think they want to end up in. So anyway, getacoderjob.com is where you can sign up for that. Stephen, what are your picks?
So my first pick would be a series of video tutorials or video walkthroughs that I've been working on called Demos with Angular on YouTube. So I've done a few things like getting started with Cordova, getting started with StackBlitz, how to do a little bit of RxJS, or the minimum you need to be effective in Angular. So I've been spending a lot of time trying to create some of that video content to walk through, really just breaking down Angular and showing how simple it can be. My second pick would be really helping people to understand and visualize some of the things that are happening with some of the reactive programming in RxJS that we've got. And so there's a couple sites, rxmarbles.com and rxviz.com, that both kind of help you visualize using these marble diagrams how reactive data can flow, and can kind of help you better understand the different operators that are available and when and where you might use them.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming and sharing with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we love just getting the updates from the Angular team. And thank everybody there for all of their work. And we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and we will catch everyone next week.
Laters, everybody.
See you soon.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.